When worship lyrics gently rewrite covenant. If we keep singing ourselves to the center, we'll keep reading Israel out of the story. There are moments when you hear something familiar and realize you've never really heard it at all. Worship music can do that. It doesn't only express what we believe, it trains what we believe. Melodies bypass the intellect and go straight into the imagination, the memory, the nervous system. What we sing becomes what we assume. What we assume becomes the way we read Scripture. This isn't an attack on worship, it's a sober look at how theology can drift, not through rebellion, but through repetition. And sometimes the gentlest lyric carries the biggest pivot. Over the last decade, 6 major songs caught my attention. Nobody, Casting Crowns. Why? Elevation Worship. Good, Good Father, Chris Tomlin. Who You Say I Am, Hillsong, Reckless Love. Corey Asbury. You Say, Lauren Daigle. Each one is sincere. Each one has comforted millions. And each one, without intending harm, can quietly reveal how modern worship often slides from Scripture's covenantal worldview into something more individualistic, more therapeutic, and, often by omission, not argument, more supersessionist in effect. Not malicious, not calculated, just disconnected from the story God actually wrote. Let's look gently, honestly, and with covenant loyalty, Brit loyalty. Worship is catechesis with a melody. The apostles expected songs to teach. Paul says we teach and admonish one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Colossians 3:16. Worship is not merely emotional release. It's formative speech. It trains the mind to default a certain way. So when worship language subtly shifts, especially around identity words like chosen, loved, called, redeemed, it matters. Because those are covenant words first. They have a history, a lineage, a people, a promise. The soft shift from covenant story to self-focused faith. Listen to these lines. Why you ever chose me has always been a mystery. Nobody. Why you love me like you love me, I'll never know. Why? At first they sound humble. But humility without covenant context quietly becomes confusion. Because biblically, God's choosing is not random, and His love is not a floating mystery. The Torah is explicit. It was not because you were many, but because Adonai loved you and kept the oath He swore to your fathers. Deuteronomy 7:7-8. In Scripture, chosen is tethered to the oath, to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Election is covenant fidelity. God binds Himself by promise. He chooses a people not because they are impressive, but because He is faithful. Now here's the subtle pivot. Modern worship often detaches chosen from Israel's story and reattaches it directly to the individual self. Why did you pick me? Why do you love me? Why do you pursue me? The shift is soft, but it's real. Identity moves from covenant history to personal introspection, and the theology moves with it. A pattern hidden in plain sight. Consider how many modern worship anthems build identity almost entirely inside the inner world. I'm loved by you. It's who I am. Good, Good Father. I am chosen, not forsaken. Who You Say I Am. God's pursuit framed chiefly as emotional intensity, reckless love. Identity grounded in what God says about me internally, you say. Let me be clear. Comfort isn't the problem. Healing isn't the problem. Scripture comforts. Scripture heals. The problem is what happens when covenant context disappears. When identity language is stripped of Israel's story, covenant becomes therapy. The patriarchs fade, the Exodus fades, the prophets fade. The new covenant becomes my inner reassurance, Instead of Jeremiah's promise to the house of Israel and the house of Judah, Jeremiah 31:31. And without anyone standing up to argue replacement theology, something even quieter happens. Israel becomes invisible, and the church becomes the people of God by default, by silence, not by scripture. That's supersessionism by erosion, not by sermon. The psychological engine underneath modern worship. This is the part many believers feel but can't name. Modern worship is often written inside a therapeutic psychological framework. It treats faith primarily as emotional reassurance, self-worth repair, inner healing, validation of the individual soul. So the worship questions become, am I loved? Am I worthy? Does God see me? Those are human questions, and sometimes necessary ones, but they're also very modern questions, shaped by an age that treats the self as the center of meaning. When that psychological frame becomes primary, biblical words get redefined. Chosen becomes a personal compliment. Loved becomes a mood stabilizer. Grace becomes sentimental permission. Identity becomes self-talk with Bible vocabulary. And suddenly, Abraham disappears. Sinai disappears. Israel disappears. Covenant disappears. And we can sing, I am chosen 1,000 times without ever asking, chosen in whom? Chosen through which covenant? Chosen for what mission? Chosen as grafted branches or as a new, separate people. Romans 11 doesn't give us a free-floating chosenness. It gives us an olive tree. It gives us roots. It gives us humility. Gentiles don't replace the tree. They're grafted in by mercy into something older than them, holier than their self-story. Why this matters and why we speak gently. This isn't written to scold worship leaders. Most are writing within the theology they inherited, the only theology many have ever been given. They're trying to help people survive. But survival isn't the same as formation. When Israel is removed, replacement theology seeps in. When covenant disappears, identity becomes emotional. When psychology leads, scripture becomes decorative. And when chosenness is detached from Abraham, it becomes self-focused, experienced as a feeling instead of received as a calling. Music doesn't merely reflect theology. It forms it. So if the songs are thin on covenant, the faith becomes thin on covenant. A better way, worship rooted in the story God actually wrote. Imagine singing the same themes, love, election, identity, rescue, but through the Brit lens. Suddenly, chosen isn't about my worth. Loved isn't a mystery floating in the air. Pursued isn't emotional intensity, it's covenant mercy. Identity isn't inner validation, it's a shared story and a shared mission. The God of Israel keeps his promise through Messiah for Israel and the nations. In one covenant family, not two, and not one replacing the other. This doesn't diminish worship, it deepens it. It doesn't silence songs, it restores meaning. Because when we return to covenant, everything gets clearer. Belonging, purpose, obedience, mercy, discipleship, worship. You don't become smaller when you're grafted into Israel's story. You become anchored. A simple practice for the worshipper and the worship leader. If you want a practical teshuvah here, a return, try this. When a lyric says chosen, whisper the roots, Abraham. When it says redeemed, remember Exodus. When it says new covenant, hear Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36, heart obedience, not spiritual amnesia. When it says I am, add in Messiah, and then ask, for what mission? And if you write songs, don't stop writing comfort. Just stop writing comfort that forgets the covenant. Let the music carry the whole story. Closing blessing. Beloved, none of this is written to condemn worship. It's written to reopen the eyes of a generation that inherited a thin gospel, a church-centered worldview, and an Israel-less theology, without ever realizing what was missing. When covenant returns to its rightful place, your faith becomes stronger, not smaller, truer, not harsher, deeper, not heavier, and your worship becomes rooted in the God who keeps covenant, even when we forget the storyline. May the shalom of our Abba guard you. Shalom v'shalva. Your brother in the way, Sergio.